Sup, y'all? It's Mr. Miller here. So today we're going to be talking about the Cold War, which is an underlying theme in our story Inside Out and Back Again. So learning targets for today are I can understand what the Cold War is, and I can understand the importance of the Cold War. So the definition, like the dictionary definition of the Cold War, is the state of political hostility that existed between the Soviet bloc countries and the United States and Western powers from 1945 to 1990, which is 45 years. But that's really complicated, and that probably went over all of your heads. So what it basically means is that it is a time period of 45 years where Russia and Russia's allies were dealing with America and its allies and trying to take over each other's worlds of influence. So they're trying to like spread communism if you're the Russians or capitalism if you were American. So it was not a war where people shot at each other and killed each other. It was a war of words and political ideas and spying. Russia and the United States in the Cold War never, ever, ever fought each other. There were wars that the United States and Russia were in, but they weren't directly fighting each other. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. Don't understand, make sure you ask, and I will define it better for you. So, how did the Cold War happen? That's a great question. So, actually, the Cold War happens right after World War II. So, the Allies in World War II are Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So, the United States of America and the United Kingdom did not trust Russia after the war at all for two main reasons. So, one is that Russia was a communist country, and they were suspicious of the communists because the communists like overthrew the government, which we talked about in an earlier video, and it caused a lot of bloodshed and it didn't work very well and it created a dictatorship. Also, people seem to forget this, and I really don't know why, but at the beginning of the war, Russia was actually allied with Germany. Like Germany and Russia were pals, and Germany turned on Russia and tried to invade Russia, which is why Russia became an ally of the United States and the United Kingdom. It wasn't because Russia liked the United Kingdom or the United States. They just did it so they can defeat Germany. There was also a distrust for America and the United Kingdom by Russia because when this is going way back to our first video, is that during World War One, the United States and the United Kingdom gave a lot of money and weapons to groups of people that were trying to stop the communists from taking over, and that didn't sit well with the communists because they could have lost their revolution if because of America and the United Kingdom meddling in their affairs. Um, so yeah, there was distrust that happened, and oh, I forgot to mention one thing that after the war, Russia controlled like this huge amount of land, like where all these countries used to be, and the United States and the United Kingdom's like, well, it's time for you to give the land back to the people that live there, Russia, and they're like, nope, we're not going to do that, and that created a huge problem. So if we take a look at this map here, Russia is ginormous. It's the world's largest country landmass wise, but the Soviet Union, Russia controlled like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, all these countries which are actually in the Middle East. They also controlled Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and they controlled all these European countries, everything in red: East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. The reason why this is all dark red is because this was all part of Russia, and these countries were independent countries, but they answered to Russia. It's kind of like the 50 states of the United States. There's 50 states that answer the federal government. Well, these are countries that answer the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union controlled legitimately half the world. Half the world was forcibly controlled by the Soviet Union. All these countries here that are in red, they used to be their own independent countries, but Germany took them over, and then Russia took them over and would not let go of them. So that was the huge problem. So the Cold War lasted from 1945 until 1990. Like I said, there were several wars that America and Russia fought to try to influence other countries to spread communism or capitalism. Again, Russia and America did not fight each other. These wars were the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Soviet-Afghan War. The Korean War actually is still going on. It never really ended. That's why there's two Koreas, and the communists are trying to fight the capitalists still to this day. The Vietnam War was fought, and the communists technically won, which we'll talk about in the next video. And then the Soviet-Afghan War, the Western powers won. So like America won that one, and the Russians won Vietnam technically. In the end, though, nobody really wins. But also there was a nuclear arms race and a race to the moon between Russia and America. Russia did win the arms race. They made a lot more nukes than the United States did, but in the trade-off is that the United States did get to the moon first, which is a trade-off in science and technology. In the 1990s, in 1990 itself, communist Russia would collapse and the Cold War ended. So America won. Like America still exists and Soviet Russia does not. So that is the Cold War as a whole. And why is this important, you ask? Because I mean, you could ask yourself, why does this matter? But it really does. So the reason is that the story we're going to read, Inside Out and Back Again, takes place during the Vietnam War, which is part of the Cold War. Without the Cold War, there wouldn't be a Vietnam War, which is what our characters are dealing with. Also, without the Cold War, there would be no race to the moon. The whole reason why we shot people in outer space and landed on the moon was to show to Russia that we're better than them. And that's the reason why there's a lot of science that got advanced. It might be actually possible if the Cold War didn't happen that we wouldn't have as much technology in the world right now. Like we may be 50 years behind. So, that's kind of important. Um, the Cold War also caused many countries around the world to create nukes. That is important, but in a bad way. I don't know what the number is, but I know that with all the nuclear weapons on the earth, we could legitimately blow ourselves up a couple hundred times over, which is really scary. But the thing is that people won't ever, in my opinion, will never do that because they know how dangerous nuclear weapons can be. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of a pro and a con depending. And there are countries today which were created because of the Cold War, like Vietnam didn't exist until the Cold War, North Korea didn't exist, technically South Korea didn't exist, and Afghanistan. Those are all outcomes of those things. So, like, these things still do happen to have important relevance today. And the Vietnam War, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there are still people who have lived through that. Like, that's not that long ago. So, it is important because it does affect people's lives directly still today. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you have an awesome day.